Welcome back to another episode of A Gift from Adversity. My name is Juri Love. I'm your host. Thank you so much for tuning in. Today we are recording episode 139. Before I introduce my guest, I want to introduce my book, which is the same title as this podcast. It's called A Gift from Adversity. I published this book in 2020 and it's available on Amazon. A Gift from Adversity's subtitle is Overcoming Sexual Abuse, Domestic Violence, Bullying, and Homelessness. And if you search A Gift from Adversity, Juri Love on Amazon, you can purchase my book. After I published my book, I got a lot of messages from all over the world, people sharing their own adversities. And I decided to start this platform where people can come in and talk about adversities, but also tools that people use to overcome and a gift that came from it. I'm grateful to have over 100 guests from all over the world. So let's invite today's guest. Hello, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
So tell our audience your name, where you coming in from today, and your job, and if you have any social media or website that you want to promote.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Juri. And such an amazing platform, a gift from adversity. What a beautiful book and a beautiful way for you to be able to share everything that we go through from adversity to becoming our beautiful selves. My name is Lunaria Gaia. I am coming in from a place called Sunshine Bay. It's about 4 hours south of Sydney, Australia. So most of you probably wouldn't have heard of it, but that is where I'm tuning in from, a town called Sunshine Bay. I teach people how to have incredible relationships with themselves so they can flourish in all areas of their life. So I'm a confidence and authenticity coach. I teach people how to love themselves.
Do you have any social media or
Oh,
website
of
people can
course I
follow?
do. Thank you. Thank you. You can find me on most social media platforms with my name, Lunaria Gaia. So if you just Google that, search that on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, you'll be able to find me. And currently, my website, you can find me at www.moreconfidence.com.au. And that's a pretty easy one to remember. What do we want more of? We want more confidence. Just add a .com.au and you'll be able to find me there on my website.
Well, thank you for that. So let's dive into your adversity. So can you tell our audience what was your adversity?
Yeah, so from the time I was very little, I really didn't like who I was. I spent a lifetime pretending. I was trying to be someone for someone else. I didn't like who I was as a child, somewhat. But as I got into my teenage years and beyond, I really discovered that who I was not enough. And I thought that if I could just get the right body, if I could lose weight, because I always carried a lot of weight as a child, if I could lose weight, then I would feel like I was enough. And the very first time I lost weight significantly was when I was 16. So I lost 20 kilos when I was 16, and all in the hopes that I would feel like, that I could be me, that I was worthy, that I was valuable. And over the next 10 years or so, I lost and put on weight 5 times, 20 kilos. I would put it on. I would feel awful about myself. I would be depressed. I would have anxiety and I would hate myself. And then I would lose weight because I got to the point where I hated myself enough. And I still didn't like myself. No matter how skinny I got, no matter how much weight I lost, I always felt like I wasn't enough. I used a whole bunch of different things to try to fix myself. I self-harmed in lots of different ways, promiscuity. I developed an eating disorder by the time I was in my early 20s. I was really struggling with effectively self-hate. I did not like who I was. My self-esteem was incredibly low, except on the outside, Juri, everybody thought that I was great. because I was really good at doing that. I was really good at pretending as though I was well and happy and confident, but on the inside, I was crying. On the inside, I was in a really dark place, negative, dark place, hating myself, and honestly didn't think that anything was particularly possible for me.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that, Lunaria. Can you go back to your childhood a little bit more? I know you said it very well, but for people who's listening and maybe not understanding what it felt like to have this putting back 20 kilo and then, you know, losing it, and you made a point, like, you just kind of a self-sabotage sometimes, and then
Mm.
how how can you describe that to other people who never kind of experience those things?
Mm. Yeah, look, I think that if we take the weight out of it, even if you've never had any kind of quote problem with your weight, I'm sure that so many of your listeners can relate to what it feels like to be really unkind to yourself, to have really high expectations and high pressure on yourself to be a certain way. That if I just fit into this certain mold, then I will be lovable. Whether or not that's get a certain grade, be in a certain friendship group, look a certain way in my case. I think for people also, like if I was just taller, if I was just, in the right social group. As life gets older, it could be, have I got the right job? Have I got the right partner? Am I making the right amount of money? No matter what it is, it's that feeling deep inside of us that we don't belong. And so we desperately try to fit in. And I remember a story when I was about 9 years old, up on the Gold Coast of Australia. You might have heard of the Gold Coast. Surfers Paradise. There is a theme park. It's a water theme park, a water park. And when I was 9 years old, I was on a family holiday up there. And I was so excited, just thrilled. I was with my big brother, and we had driven past the theme park several times over a few days, and I could see the big tall water slide that I was really excited to go on. And the day finally came. We arrived at the theme park. It was our turn. There were hundreds of, or if not thousands of kids at the water park. And even at the tender age of 9 years old, I was body conscious. I was aware that I was not only bigger, but I was also going through puberty already. So I already had breasts by the time I was 9, significantly so. My body was very different to those kids around me. And I think that many of us can relate to the idea that we want to fit in. We want to look like, be like, sound like, dress like the cool kids. And for me, going into that day at the water park, I was pretty well nothing but excited. But I was aware that I looked different. So I would wear a big baggy t-shirt over my swimmers, over my bathers. And it didn't bother me. I just went on the big slide with my brother. And you have to climb 7 flights of stairs. 7 flights of stairs to get to the top, and then you're going to go down this massive slide, water slide. And it takes a long time because there's many, many children in the line ahead of us. And so we waited, and it was hot, and we waited, and the anticipation's building. And finally we get to the top. It's our turn. We're finally going to get to go down that slide into the freedom that we were looking for. And my big brother was my hero at the time. And he turns and looks at me and he goes, "Do you want to go first, or do you want me to go first?" And I said, "No, no, big brother, I want to see you go first. I want to watch you go so I know how to do it." He says, "Rightio." And off he goes. Off he goes down the slide. And next it's going to be my turn. The lifeguard, Juri. The lifeguard looks at me and pulls me over and says, "You, come here." And I thought it was my turn. I thought that that was the moment that I was going to be, you know, taken down and told what I meant to do. And he says to me, "You can't go down the slide with your t-shirt on." And I looked down at my t-shirt that was covering my bathers. And I said, "No, no, but you don't understand. I have to wear my bathers." Because at that tender age at 9, I was already body conscious enough to feel ashamed of it. And the lifeguard, must have been about 15 years old on his summer job, and he didn't care about my fragile self-esteem. And he said, "Whatever, kid, you either take the t-shirt off and go down the slide, or you walk back down those stairs." And during that moment, I had a choice. And it would have been lovely, maybe, to stand here before you saying that I made the big, brave choice to take that t-shirt off and follow my big brother down the slide. I panicked. I didn't know what I should do. I didn't know whether or not I had the guts to take the t-shirt off. That terrified me. But the idea of walking back down and past every single kid, and maybe they were going to tease me and make fun of me, I didn't know which one was worse. But what I can tell you was, on that day, I chose shame. I chose pain. I chose a lack of belief in myself. And I chose to hide away from the world in replacement of fun. And I walked back down those 7 flights of stairs with my t-shirt firmly on at the tender age of 9. And I got down to the bottom, and my brother had wondered, "What happened? What took you so long?" And for a very long time, my parents and my big brother believed that it was the height of the slide that scared me, rather than the depth of my shame around my body. And I think that so many of us can relate to that. That there's this time where maybe we could have stepped forward, maybe we could have been courageous, maybe we could have done something that would have liberated us, but we maybe decided to fit in. Maybe we decided that we were too ashamed to take a step forward. And I think so many of us choose to fit in over really deciding to follow our own heart. And that's what it was like for me when I was a kid.
I can totally picture the panic and the shame and the choice. And I know you are 9 years old, but those are the moments that even when you get older in your life, that you will never forget.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, and I think that's why I tell the story as I do now, because it's those pivotal moments that later on in my life, I look back on that moment, and very often as I was a teenager, in my early 20s, when I was deeply suffering, that pattern, that choice that I made at 9 to choose shame over fun, over life, is what I did for the next 15 years. For the next 15 years, I kept making choices that were aligned with my fear rather than faith and fun and living.
In Australia, is fat shaming big? Like in Japan, it's
Mhm.
huge. In
Mm,
Japan, it's worse than America. I must say, like in Japan, like even like a few kilo, which is like a few pounds in America, people just get so self-conscious. And
mm,
um, I don't know what it is, but a lot of times in Japan, for instance, like I remember I was really skinny, but
mhm,
then um, there's some kid who were a little bit bigger, and they were just completely bullied and then completely shamed, fat shamed, and then um, I can see them like deteriorating, like they're just breaking to pieces. And I feel
mm,
like in America, it's definitely less, and then less than Japan's like really precise, like a kilo world.
mm,
Um, but definitely in America, I've seen similar fat shaming and fitting. Interestingly, it's kind of changing in like modeling world. They're like a bigger size model, and the mannequin,
mm,
even at the Target, there's a bigger size corner. Men and women too. It's definitely changing and embracing a little more. But back then,
mm,
nobody had talked about um, what I grew up in Japan, to be okay to have a little bit of overweight than other people, or than say standard, which Japanese standard is like that's really thin.
Yeah.
So I don't know what is going on in Australia when you are growing up in terms of like fat shaming and bullying versus now. Can you explain what's going on in Australia to our audience?
Yeah, and great question, Juri, because I think that it does depend culturally where you are in the world. Um, I would still say that globally, 2024, even with a body positivity movement, which we've had over the last, look, I only want to say 4 or 5 years. I've been doing this for the last 14 years, and it's only been in the last, no, 2 to 3 years that figures like Tones and I, people like Lizzo have come out and, are actually celebrated as they are rather than what they look like. I think that body shaming is still incredibly huge. And I made the distinction there with body shaming because I think that body shame doesn't discriminate. Like you, Juri, irrelevant of in Japan, whatever the beauty standards are at the time, if you don't fit into it, there's shame around that. And somebody that's considered quite slim in Australia might be considered fat in Japan, and then there's shame around it. And look, we're going back 30 years, as you pointed out. I'm 40 now, so by the when I was 9 and 10, there was definitely no positivity around a bigger body. And I'm not sure what measurement you roll in, but I'm 5'10", so I'm quite tall. But I was tall. I was a tall child as well. So even by the time I was 14, I was 5'9". So and I looked like a woman. So I had breasts and I had a body like a woman by the time I was like 11 or 12. So to answer your question, I think that less so now, but still very prevalent. One of the biggest insults that a child will give to another child in 2024 in Australia is still "you're fat." That's still an insult. Calling somebody fat is still an insult. And for me, I just turned that in on myself. So I wasn't bullied a lot at school because I was bigger than everybody. And I also, my big brother, who was my hero, he was 2 years older than me. So we went to school together pretty well along the whole way. And he was big and tough and scary. So most people wouldn't bully me. But in saying that, Juri, I got bullied at home. And I know that seems a little bit odd. A lot of people get bullied at school, but at home, our environment at home, one of the nicknames that I got called was Fatty. Hey, Fatty, go get the thing. Like it was considered a joke, but it was often spoken about my body, the fact that I was fat. My family members had bigger bodies as well. But I seemed to be the one that got poked at. If any of us put on any weight, we were laughed at within the household. So it's very common to laugh and to poke fun at a fat person, certainly 30 years ago. Now, Juri, I think that people still do it, children especially. It's just not socially acceptable anymore to do it. But people are still thinking it. I don't actually think it's changed. I think that people are just more quiet about it now. I think that there is still a lot of shame around being in a bigger body, and being fat is still considered one of the worst things that you can possibly be. And I'm pretty sure that that's kind of global. Hearing about Japan, even hearing in other countries, it's still a really, like, societally a very bad thing to be fat. Most people would prefer to be skinny and unhealthy than fat and well. And so I think that in Australia, it's definitely still, it's just, yeah, as I'll say, it's just not socially acceptable anymore to outwardly tease somebody for being fat. But it certainly still happens, no doubt about it.
I am so sorry to hear. I feel like if you didn't have your brother at school, your life would have been school life would have been very, very different.
Very different. Yeah, Jaren, if I would, I actually turned all of what could have been bullying. So people tried to bully me at high school, like in school. Um, here's where the self-hate really comes into it, because I became a bigger bully to myself than anybody possibly could have, right? One day I without thinking about it, I wore a purple t-shirt and a purple pair of pants to school. We didn't have a uniform, and that's what I wore. And I don't know if you know the character from McDonald's. You know McDonald's, the food chain. There's Ronald McDonald, and then there's Grimace and Hamburglar. There's all these like characters. It's a character called Grimace, and he's a big purple fat thing. He's just a big round purple thing. And on that day when I left, got on the school bus, I looked down and realized that I was wearing all purple and somebody could insult me as Grimace. So before anybody could call me Grimace, before anybody even suggested it, I picked on myself out loud to everybody else. So when somebody would say, oh, hey, how are you, get on the bus, and they'd look at me and I'd say, look at me, I'm dressed as Grimace. I would bully myself and pick on myself and say the most awful things to myself inside of my head, but also out loud. I out-bullied any bully that could have ever possibly bullied me. I put myself down. I laughed at myself. I poked fun at me in front of everybody else, so that if anybody else tried to bully me, they couldn't get in, because I would say worse things about me than they possibly could. But Juri, what that did was made for a very toxic environment internally. You've been bullied, and you know what it's like to have such awful things and treatment from the outside world. It becomes your internal narrative. For me, it was kind of the other way around. My internal narrative was just abusive. It was toxic. I bullied myself. I hated myself. I was crueler to myself than anybody could have ever possibly been in the outside. And that's what life was like for me. I was awful to myself. It was toxic and abusive.
And then you mentioned earlier when we introduced yourself and adversity, that self-harm and then promiscuity. Can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, so because I felt so much pain on the inside, but I never showed it on the outside. I was a party girl. So I had almost this character that I lived up to, of how I think other people, like how I should be, in inverted commas, like how other people would love me. And if other people liked me and approved of me, then I felt like I could be enough. I never felt like enough. I'm just getting really clear on that. I didn't feel that way, but I thought that if they just liked me enough, then I would feel valuable. So I became everything that I thought that I, quote, should be. And in my teenage years, the pain inside of me felt really overwhelming. And I often didn't know how to express that, because I didn't think that I was allowed to talk about, we're also talking 25 years ago, so mental health conversations weren't apparent. It was very much just tough it up, don't talk about it, just push it down, suppress it. So I had a lot of pain and angst going on inside of me. So that really led me to, at times, cutting. I would cut myself just so I could feel the pain that was on the inside. I could get it out somehow out of me into the world. And that was, to me, that's self-harm, it's self-abuse. So is drinking. Because I looked like an adult and I had a lot of confidence, so at that outward bravado, I was able to fake it really well. So by the time I was about 14 or 15, I could buy alcohol. I could walk into shops and buy alcohol and cigarettes. And legally, it's not until you're 18 in this country that you can buy those things. But I was able to 3 or 4 years earlier. So that led me to a lot of binge drinking. I would buy alcohol and I would be, especially by the time I was 16, 17, 18, I would drink Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, usually. By the time I was 17, 18, 19, I was partaking in several different drug types, marijuana, ecstasy, those kind of things. Also, I could run away from me. I didn't know how to have a good time. I didn't know how to have fun without being this party girl. And part of that, by the time I was a bit older, 17, 18, and into my late teens, was men. If men loved me, if men were attracted to me, if they wanted to take me home, this was the belief back then, if they wanted to take me home, then I was worthy. So what that meant, that as a teenager or a young woman, I I participated in sexual acts with people that, that made me feel worse, Jury. So there was drugs, there was alcohol, there was food, there was people pleasing, there was promiscuity. For me, Jury, it was anything that I could do to try to get away from me. Anything that I could do to try to ease the pain that was inside of me, even temporarily. And yeah, that was food. That was, when it wasn't food, well, it was always food, actually. I could always get food. But when it wasn't drugs or alcohol or cigarettes or sex, then food was my go-to. So it was no matter the abusive technique that I had, I drowned myself in it. And I spent zero time alone. I was surrounded by people all the time because I never wanted to be in my own head because it was such an awful place to be.
My heart breaks for you, and
Thank you.
really thank you so much for sharing this, because a lot of people hide these things, and then it's even like my book, I talked about the same things.
Mm,
Luckily I wasn't exposed to, or I kind of have an alcohol allergy myself. So
mhm.
like I get rash, or like my heart gets like really fast. So I don't want to drink. Uh, even I'm over legal age, I'm
Ah,
47. But even if I have like a tiny bit of like beer, I can't even walk. So I'm like highly like intolerant for alcohol since the
mm,
beginning. So that was no. And then I was like kind of asthmatic, so like a smoking thing didn't work. So I
mm,
went to the sex part of it too.
yeah.
And it's interesting you said no matter how much you sleep around, that you don't feel good. And it's same thing about, I was driven for more of um validation, because I
Mm,
was violated sexually so early on without my will, that when it became my turn, that I have a control over my body and sex, that I wanted to repaint what I lost, but I
yeah.
felt it bad afterwards.
Yeah.
So my case is similar kind of, but sabotaging myself by
Mm,
doing harm to myself and then not knowing my value. And it's interesting
mm,
that the root cause of it, of your case and my case, are completely different. But then
mm,
as a human being, male or female, I feel like um, the root that we share commonly, or although you grew up in Australia, I grew up in Japan, it's almost like a pressure from society, and then what media puts on us, and then what people think that how we should be, or um just categorize us as this and that. And then when you don't fit in those types, I think it's unfortunate that your parents even bullied you in
mm,
certain situations, that it got worse than better. And then again, the mental health part of it. I grew up in like 80s, 90s, where if you ever say you have a therapist, you would lose a job.
oh, yeah.
But in here, America, 2024, if you don't have therapists, you're wrong. So
Yes.
it's
It's
like an
changed.
extreme like shift. But
Mm.
how you mentioned that there was not so much of mental health talk growing up. How is it now? Is it getting better, or like became like extreme like America?
Do you mean in Australia?
Yeah.
Yeah, look, I think that globally it's changed. The conversation has changed. I suppose I don't know so much in other cultures, but it would be similar to the America in that thing. Look, I think that mental health still comes with a lot of taboo. I do. I know we're talking about it a lot more. And Juri, I was chatting with a dear colleague and friend of mine today around this, that what I see is happening in the world now, when you talk about one pendulum swing to the other, I see that we have an increased sensitivity in the world. We're far more sensitive to our feelings. We're far more sensitive to what's going on, triggers, and our mental health. We're a lot more sensitive around all of that topic, and I think that that's a really wonderful thing. There is a lot more sensitivity. What I also see, Jury, is a lot more fragility, and I think that that's damaging. I think that there's a fragility of it's a fine line to walk, and I'm happy to talk more about this. I think with the increase of sensitivity has come the increase in fragility, and people aren't as willing, even though we have more conversations around mental health, I think people aren't as willing to actually do the work that it takes to recover. It's kind of in the same way that somebody might say, I have a condition, I have a health condition, let's call it diabetes. I have diabetes. There's nothing I can do about that. I'm just going to take my medication and be, not necessarily complain, but it's my lot in life. I see a lot of people not taking the empowered steps to be able to actually create shifts for themselves, and they get stuck in the identity of their condition. So people will know, cool, they've had really heavy life experiences like you have, Jury. They're heavy life experiences. And I think a lot of people in 2024, I see this in Australia and I see this globally, a lot of people are attached to that identity, and therefore they're not able to gain strength and be empowered because of it. They get held back by it. And so what I see in 2024 is taboo. There is taboo to be talking about these kind of subjects. Yes, there is more awareness, which is fabulous. I just see this real, to me, what I would say a dangerous pattern or a dangerous trap of many people talking about their mental health or their mental illness, but not doing much about it.
Well, thank you so much for shedding a light to overall conversation and really explaining to me about what's going on in Australia, because
Mm,
each country we definitely have different expectation and different like you said taboo and things that gender gap plays the role. And it's very interesting to learn that it's kind of similar of what you went
mm,
through and what I went through, although we were raised in completely different countries. And it's kind of
amazing.
interesting to learn that, you know, around your self-esteem and the self-sabotage, and then the outcome of it, and then what you react to, what you lacked in your life is very similar, you and I,
Mm,
however we
yeah.
work across the world. But
Mm,
yeah, thank you so much for sharing it. I have a lot to think about, and then this is really not a puzzle, but how did we go this route? Like I mentioned about, you know, media, and then I mentioned about earlier when I went to Target, there was a mannequin that's plus size. And then I worked with IB modeling since 17. I have worked with plus size model, which was
mhm,
never possible before. And then
yeah.
plus size section was never really around. And then
Mm,
even like say Kohl's, Target, like big department store, they have a plus size section now.
yeah. Mm,
And also in terms of inclusion, like the people with wheelchair, they have more opportunity, or Down syndromes, they have more opportunity for inclusion. Is Australia changing in that kind of direction too, in terms of media appearance
Yeah.
thing?
It's huge. I would think that, we even have an acronym in the corporate sector. It's diversity and inclusion. Like in most big companies in Australia, you will have a diversity and inclusion team. You will have a complete task force about how do we have more diversity and inclusivity. So that would be, we need to make sure we have, this is Australian corporates, they'll be talking about, we need to make sure we have Black or people of color. We need to make sure that we have enough women. We need to make sure we have people with disabilities. We need to make sure we have plus side people. We need to make sure we have people from the LGBTIQIA plus. There is a huge surge push of diversity. Even if you watch a television show like Australian Idol, you will very often see a huge diverse range. Being gay is very, very normal. Rainbow flags everywhere. Plus size, absolutely. If you go into a lingerie store, often the even on the posters will be older women as well, not just plus size women, but older women. And they won't be photoshopped as much as they still have hair and makeup and lighting, and they look beautiful, but you're more likely to see, the saggy skin under the arms. You're more likely to see a bit of cellulite or imperfections. That's certainly, in Australian culture, the conversation is huge around diversity, enormous.
Do you think it's a good thing compared to when you were growing up?
Compared to when I was growing up, yes, I do think it's a good thing. Compared to, because I think that never seeing yourself represented, I think that when it was always just an image of perfection that the vast majority of people could never live up to, I think that sends a message to everybody else that you can't be successful, happy, well, celebrated. So I think compared to where we were 30, 40 years ago, I think that I think it's a good thing compared to.
Well, thank you so much. Let's move on to our second question, which is my favorite part of the podcast, which
Yeah.
is the tools that you use to overcome. And then basically, what I like about this question is people who came to this podcast, everybody went through different extreme challenges in their lives,
Mm.
but the tools that they use to overcome are very unique. And it's sometimes that I've never heard of it and I actually applied for it. For instance, there was a guest who had 5 consecutive miscarriages, and she was very angry. And then she went to Ray's room where you pay and break everything with different weapons in New
Yes.
Jersey.
Yeah.
And I've never heard of it. And I looked up, and I turned out there were a similar business 30 minutes away from where I lived. So I went, and then I went twice, and then with my son, it was really incredible experience. So this is what I like about, because people who never actually went through challenges like us, they just say, "Hey, go see a therapist, just forgive and forget." It's not easy like that.
Mm.
So, Lunaria, what can you say the tools that worked for you that you can share with our audience?
Yeah, beautiful. Look, I think that there are, if I was to put it into three main categories, I would say you need to master your thoughts, learn what your emotions are teaching you, and lead your fear. And so I'll explain what I mean by those things. So for myself, like I have learned to love myself. That's where we're at. We're at that point where over many, many years, I went and did the inward work, and not so much through therapy, but through coaching. So I trained in coaching, and I trained in a methodology called NLP, neuro linguistic programming. And effectively through NLP, it's, to me, the language of the mind. How is our neural pathways, our beliefs, our identity built within our own heads? Because once we learn the blueprint, like with the map of reality that we are working off, then we have power to be able to change that map of reality. So what I love is that beliefs and thoughts are not fact. I think that so many of us assume that just because we think it, it's true, and it's not. Or just because we believe it, it's fact. It's not. The truth of the matter is that when we were a child, particularly between the ages of 0 and 7, we created a map of reality. And based on the experiences around us and the influence of the people around us, we learnt that one thing equaled another. So women equal this, men equal that, relationships, sex, money, environment, politics equal this. And the vast majority of those beliefs that we learnt were just given to us by our parents. They were given to us by our environment. And if they were just given to us by our environment and by our parents, then who's to say that it's actually true? Because I think we've all had that experience, Juri, where we realize that maybe something that we just considered normal, like, for you having had sexual abuse as a child, maybe you felt very uncomfortable by that. But it's very easy at that age to just assume that that's normal, particularly when a perpetrator is telling us that it's okay. The adults tell us it's okay, so we believe it. So, if I think about my family environment, overeating, promiscuity, low self-esteem, drinking was a huge part of my family culture. I'm the youngest of 5 and the only girl. And I grew up in a rugby club. So I was surrounded by men who treated women poorly. That's just how it was. So I grew up believing that women were less than. Now, considering I was a girl, I'm going to grow up to think that I am less than, simply because I'm a woman, because I'm a girl. Now, is that belief true? No. But unless we understand that we have that belief structure, we can't do anything about it. So for me, what I love about coaching, what I love about NLP is that rather than having to dive deep into the emotion of the thing, which is an important part of healing, by the way, but what I found really transformed me was to be able to identify the pathway in my brain, the belief, the thought pattern. If I can identify the thought pattern and the belief, then I can make progress to change that thought pattern. So if I have a belief and the thought that goes over in my head, it was, I'm a piece of crap, I'm a piece of crap. That's what I heard a lot in my head. I don't deserve this, I'm awful, I'm a piece of crap. So if that's going around in my head 60,000 times a day, of course I'm going to feel bad about myself. But as soon as I started to recognize that that's just a pattern, that's just habitual, that's just something that I developed as a child that now I've taken on as an adult, then now I'm empowered, because that thought, whenever it came into my head, is that true? It may or may not be. What would I like to think instead? Well, I would like to think that maybe I might not be a piece of crap. Start small. You don't need to stand in front of the mirror and say, I love you, I love you, I love you. You're not going to believe it. But what it is about recognizing and challenging that belief, challenging that thought. And when you are able to master your mind like that, you can direct it anywhere that you want it to go, which means you can focus on the things that you want to focus on, which means that you can not ignore the feelings that you've experienced and or the experiences that you've gone through, but you're able to transform them, because we get to decide the meaning that we place on the events that have happened in our life. If we are relying on external circumstances to determine how we feel, we are forever at the mercy of something that's outside of our control. So what I've really learned to do, and what I teach all of my clients, is to master your mind, your thoughts, your focus, your beliefs, to learn how to interpret your emotions, because they have something to teach us. What is our anger teaching us? What is our depression wanting to, like, what does it want to say? What is stress teaching us? And then finally, that big 3 one there, Juri, around fear. Fear is our default mode. And it's our default mode because it's our survival part of us. It's the part of our mind and our brain that just wants to keep us alive. And fear is wanting us to stay small, to stay safe, to stay quiet. It would have been, I'd imagine, pretty scary for you to write the book. At some point in time, for you to talk about the story, there's a part of you saying, don't do it. People are gonna say stuff. You can't talk about your emotions. It's not okay. Don't tell the story. Stay quiet, stay small. Fear's only doing that because it's trying to keep you alive, and it thinks that the whole world and change is dangerous. So in order for us to overcome that, we need to lead our fear and treat it like the darling little immature child that it is. When our child is afraid of the monster under the bed, we don't jump under the sheets and go, oh my gosh, you're right, there is a monster under the bed. We calmly, we gently, we reassure that darling child. We check under the bed, we reassure them, we tell them that everything is okay and that you're just going to be next door. We must lead our fear, otherwise it's going to lead us. And when our fear leads us, we are going to remain small, trapped, disempowered, and feeling like a victim. But if we lead our fear, if we master our mind and we learn how to translate our emotions, we will feel empowered. We will be a victor in our life, not a victim.
Love it so much. Tell us about NLP, what it stands for again.
Neuro, as in brain, neuro, linguistic, as in language, and programming. Neuro-linguistic programming. And the way that I see NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, is a whole network of road systems. If you can imagine, I don't know, where in America are you, Juri?
Massachusetts.
Massachusetts. So I don't know if you've ever been to LA. When LA and you have that aerial shot where all of these massive roads are intertwining and underneath, and there's so many roads, right? Even maybe a city like Tokyo, so many roads going in so many different directions. What NLP shows us is that is a map, and our mind is habitual. It's a habit, right? So if you think about doing something scary in your life, the habit, the pathway is a super highway, and it's going to take you from where you are to the results that it's used to taking. And just say that's fear and stopping and not doing it, then that's where that pathway, that road is going to take you. What NLP does is show us that is simply just a map, and we can collapse that road and build a new one. And we can build a new one that pathway, when something scary comes up, that leads us towards courage and faith and surrender and action rather than self-sabotage and procrastination. We can literally rewire and rebuild our neural network to be able to create a different reality for ourselves and do different things and become a different person. And I love it for that reason.
That is incredible.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing these tools. And then I've never heard of NLP until today, so I really appreciate.
Fabulous.
So let's dive into the last question, which is a gift that came from your adversity. So, Lunaria, what would you say the gift that came from your adversity?
Oh, so many gifts from this adversity. I speak about this often. Because I now pay it forward, because I have my own podcast, I'm here on your podcast. I've just finished writing my second book. I teach this to the world. What the biggest gift that I have ever found from this is that I have contrast. I know what it's like. I've walked in the shoes. I think that sometimes practitioners don't have a lived experience. When a client sits in front of me and says, I've been having these awful thoughts about myself, or when I'm constructing a course, I know exactly what it is that they need because I've done it myself. The gift is that I get to live this incredible life on my terms. I mean, the biggest gift I would say from this adversity is that I love myself, right? The biggest gift is that I learned how to feel fully free within my being. That's a gift. That's a huge gift. And I think that the gift of the adversity itself is that I get to pass it on to others. Is that as a result of what I've lived through and what I've learned through, I get to lessen the time that other people have to suffer, because I can show them the way. I can show them the out, that they don't have to just keep going on this cycle where they feel, disempowered and hopeless. There's actually a way out, and you can learn how to do it. And I think that that gift is absolutely extraordinary, and one that I hope that I never take for granted.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. Before you go,
Pleasure.
before you go, if there is a girl or somebody out there, a young, even boy or whoever, is going through exactly what you went through, what is your biggest advice that you can give?
I want to keep it as simple as possible. The biggest thing that I want them to know is that thoughts aren't fact. It's the biggest thing that I want you to know. If you can recognize that the thing that's going up here in between your ears, just because you think it or believe it, doesn't mean it's true. Doubt your self doubt. You've just been taught to think this way, and you don't need to. So if you start to doubt your self doubt, if you start to question what you've been taught and your thoughts, you can start being empowered to make new choices. And you're never too young to learn how to take command of your mind, ever too young. So get amongst it, read the books, go, do the podcast, get into personal development. If you learn how to master your mind, your life will be exquisite. Do not believe everything that you think, and certainly do not believe everything that the world tells you. Question it. Question it, question it, question it.
Well, it was a beautiful podcast. Thank you so much again for coming in and sharing your story.
Such a pleasure. Thank you for having me and for providing this platform where we can really realize. I mean, I love the title of your book and of course the podcast, because adversity is a gift. If we turn it into that, it can be a horrible experience. Adversity can be absolutely awful. But if we can take power from it and take power from it back from those who have taken it from us, then the gifts that we have are absolutely enormous, and then we get to share it with the world. So thank you for creating the platform.
Absolutely. And then I think the biggest takeaway from you today for me is that you now have a power to shorten the challenge that people face because of you advocating for them and sharing the tools. So thank you for doing that. And I want you to keep shining and keep going.
Thank you. Thank you, Jerry.
Absolutely. And thank you everyone for tuning in. We have more guests coming in, so stay tuned. See you next time.